He was a military genius, a mind so sharp that his name is still whispered in the halls of military academies around the world. Sun Tzu, the man who wrote The Art of War, changed the course of history with his strategies. But what if I told you there was more to his genius than just battlefield tactics? What if the key to his success was something much darker, something that fooled an entire nation? In an era of bloodshed and constant warfare, one man played the ultimate game of deception. He wasn't just leading his soldiers to victory, was manipulating the minds of his enemies, his allies, and even his own king. How did Sun Tzu trick an entire nation into believing they had won, when in reality they had already lost? To uncover the truth behind his greatest victory, we must first understand how the game was played and who the real enemy was. The answer lies hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. And it starts here. The year was 500 BC. In the chaos of ancient China, a fractured kingdom teetered on the brink of war. Nations were divided, and their leaders were desperate for a victory that could unite them under a single banner. Amongst the bloodshed and turmoil, a figure emerged from the shadows: Sun Tzu, the strategist whose very name would become synonymous with military brilliance. But what was it that set him apart from all the other commanders of his time? Why did one of his most famous battles begin with a shocking gamble that no one could have anticipated? At the time, the state of Wu was embroiled in an intense conflict with the larger and more powerful state of Chu. Wu was outnumbered and had less experience, but Sun Tzu saw something that no one else could, a way to exploit the enemy's overconfidence and weaknesses. And he was willing to take extreme risks to show his worth. In the royal court of Wu, the king, Helu, was desperate. His army was disorganized, untrained, and demoralized. He needed a miracle, someone who could turn the tide in his favor. When Sun Tzu presented himself, the king was skeptical. How could a man who was a stranger to the kingdom possibly turn things around? But Sun Tzu made a bold promise. He would turn his untrained soldiers into the greatest army in all of China. The king, uncertain but desperate, gave him a chance. And that's when Sun Tzu revealed his first test. He would not only train the soldiers, but he would manipulate the very concept of war itself. With his strategies of deception, misdirection, and manipulation, Sun Tzu began to build an army, but not in the traditional sense. He didn't focus solely on drills or swordsmanship. Instead, he concentrated on mental tactics, preparing his soldiers for the psychological warfare they would soon face. And then came the first test. To demonstrate that his soldiers could follow orders without question, Sun Tzu ordered a group of royal concubines to be trained as soldiers. The task seemed impossible. How could these women, trained for a life of luxury, ever be transformed into disciplined warriors? Sun Tzu, however, was never one to shy away from an impossible challenge. When the concubines failed to follow orders during their training, Sun Tzu had them executed not out of cruelty, but to demonstrate the cost of disobedience. This brutal act would send a clear message to the rest of the army: discipline was non-negotiable, and Sun Tzu was the master of both strategy and control. Yet, what made Sun Tzu different from others was not just his discipline. It was his ability to see the battlefield not just as a place of combat, but as a space for manipulation. He understood that control over the mind was just as important, if not more so, than control over the sword. But this would be just the beginning of his plan. The stakes were about to rise, and Sun Tzu was ready to play the game of deception on a scale no one had ever imagined. He knew that to win, he would have to outthink not just the enemy but everyone around him. His real battle was just beginning, and no one could anticipate what was coming next. As Sun Tzu's training continued, the army of Wu slowly began to take shape. But this wasn't the disciplined, conventional army that the king had expected. This was something entirely different. Sun Tzu had already begun to implement his master plan that was based on manipulation, confusion, and control. The next phase of Sun Tzu's strategy was daring. In the heart of the conflict, the state of Wu was facing an approaching army of the state of Chu. The odds were stacked against them. Chu's forces were vast, well-trained, and experienced. The stakes could not have been higher. Sun Tzu understood that the battle would be won or lost not by strength, but by strategy. His first move would involve creating an illusion of power. Sun Tzu began with subtle deception. He ordered his soldiers to erect massive fortifications that made Wu appear far stronger than it actually was. The walls were tall and imposing, and the enemy spies would soon report back that Wu was not to be trifled with. However, this was not the reality. The fortifications were temporary. The real defense lay in the psychological advantage that Sun Tzu sought to gain by creating the illusion of invincibility. Then came the next phase of Sun Tzu's plan, a brilliant act of psychological manipulation that would shape the course of the war. He ordered the soldiers to pretend to retreat, as though they were giving up the fight. The retreat was not a loss, but a carefully crafted ruse. They left behind decoy weapons and discarded armor, making it seem like they were defeated. The army of Chu, upon seeing this, was emboldened. They had believed their victory was inevitable, but Sun Tzu knew that this overconfidence would be their downfall. The enemy had no idea that they had already fallen into a trap. The battle was about to turn in a way that no one could have foreseen. As the Chu forces marched forward, thinking they had won, Sun Tzu's soldiers lay in wait. The calm before the storm was palpable. Every soldier knew their role, their purpose, and most importantly, the deception they were playing. The enemy, thinking the war was already over, was walking straight into Sun Tzu's well-laid trap. In an instant, everything changed. Sun Tzu's army, which had been feigning defeat, suddenly turned the tables. They launched a surprise counterattack with devastating precision. It was as if the entire battlefield had been flipped upside down. The first strike shattered the enemy's morale, and their advance forces were cut off. What followed was a complete reversal of fortunes. The Chu soldiers, who had once been brimming with confidence, were now in full retreat, their formations disintegrating under the surprise attack. The once proud army, which thought it had claimed victory, was now scrambling to save itself from total annihilation. It was not the strength of Wu's forces that won the day, it was the manipulation of the enemy's mindset, the exploitation of their overconfidence. Sun Tzu had outsmarted them all, but in his mind, this was just the beginning. His strategy had worked, yes, but it was merely a small part of a much larger plan. The real victory was not just in the battlefield's dust and blood, it was in the manipulation of perception. The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves through the kingdom of Wu. News of the stunning victory reached King Helu's ears, and the court was in uproar. They had won against all odds, and the credit was given to Sun Tzu's genius. The king, who had once doubted the strategist, now saw the full extent of his abilities. But what they didn't understand was that Sun Tzu's methods were about more than just winning battle. She was reshaping the very nature of warfare itself. But despite this victory, a question lingered in the air. Was Sun Tzu truly the hero of this battle, or was there a darker side to his tactics? The king, now in awe, would soon face a decision that would test not just his trust in Sun Tzu but his understanding of war itself. Then it happened, the moment that changed history, the Battle of Boju. After the stunning victory over Chu, Sun Tzu's tactics were beginning to take hold in the courts of Wu. His reputation as a strategist was solidified, but the true test was yet to come. The stakes would be higher than ever before. Sun Tzu was about to face an even more formidable challenge. The full might of the Chu military, led by their greatest generals, would march on Wu. The outcome of this confrontation would determine whether Sun Tzu's methods were simply flukes or the future of warfare itself. The battle was set. Both sides gathered their forces, their armies now a reflection of the strategies they embodied. On one side stood the disciplined, mind-controlled soldiers of Wu. On the other, the mighty, proud army of Chu, who still believed in their unshakable superiority. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only their military might, but also their very understanding of war. The generals of Chu, emboldened by their past victories, underestimated their enemy. They assumed their superiority would easily crush Wu's forces. But Sun Tzu, ever the strategist, had something else in mind. As the battle unfolded, it quickly became clear that Sun Tzu's real brilliance lay not in the strength of his army, but in the mind games he played. The battlefield was a place of chaos, but Sun Tzu turned that chaos into an advantage. With every maneuver, every decision, he created doubt in the minds of the Chu generals. They began to question their own strategy. What seemed like a victory in their grasp turned into uncertainty. Every move they made seemed to be countered by a response that came from nowhere. Sun Tzu anticipated their every step, staying one move ahead. The Chu forces began to lose confidence in their plan, and that was exactly what Sun Tzu had hoped for. The battle had become not just a clash of armies, it was a battle of perceptions, and Sun Tzu was winning. But the true turning point of the battle came when the Chu generals, convinced they had trapped Sun Tzu's forces, decided to launch their final assault. The decisive move they believed would crush the Wu forces would instead set the stage for one of the most brilliant reversals in military history. The Battle of Boju reached its peak when the Chu forces, believing they had outmaneuvered Sun Tzu, charged forward in a desperate final assault. The generals thought they had cornered Sun Tzu's army, forcing them into a position from which there was no escape. But as the Chu forces advanced, they realized something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Sun Tzu's army had been biding its time. It had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and now that moment had arrived. With one swift, coordinated move, Sun Tzu's forces launched a surprise counterattack. It was an ambushon that caught the Chu soldiers completely off guard. The momentum shifted in an instant. The very soldiers who had once seemed invincible were now disorganized, scattered, and vulnerable. Sun Tzu's forces surrounded them, trapping them in a deadly vice. It was a textbook trap, executed with the precision of a master strategist. The Chu forces, who had believed they were victorious, were now being crushed beneath the weight of their own arrogance. The battle was won not by brute force but by outthinking the enemy at every turn. Sun Tzu's strategy had worked to perfection. He had created doubt, confusion, and ultimately, a breakdown in the enemy's confidence. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the scale of the victory became clear. The once proud Chu army, which had been so sure of its superiority, was in ruins. Their generals were forced to retreat, and Wu stood victorious. But as Sun Tzu looked over the battlefield, his mind was already racing ahead. This was not just a victory, it was the culmination of a larger plan. Sun Tzu had not only defeated the Chu army, he had completely reshaped the way warfare would be understood from that point forward. The psychological warfare, the manipulation of perception, the control of confidence, these were the true weapons that had won the day. But as Sun Tzu surveyed the aftermath of his victory, a new question emerged. What would be the long-term consequences of his manipulations? And how far would he be willing to go in the future to shape the destiny of the kingdoms of China? The most shocking part of Sun Tzu's victory wasn't the battle itself, it was what came after. The world believed the war was over. Wu had triumphed over Chu in a battle that seemed like a textbook example of military strategy. But the truth was far from what anyone had been told. Sun Tzu's victory was not just a matter of winning a single engagement. It was the culmination of a plan so intricate, so layered, that even those closest to him didn't understand its true purpose. What appeared to be a string of brilliant military tactics was actually part of a much more complex, far-reaching strategy that manipulated not just his enemies but the very fabric of the political landscape. Sun Tzu had played his game not just on the battlefield, but within the very halls of power. The court of Wu, now enamored with his genius, believed that his loyalty was absolute, that his actions were driven by an unwavering dedication to the state. But the truth was darker. Sun Tzu wasn't just working for Wu He, was manipulating the entire situation to create his own power base. In the aftermath of the battle, the king of Wu Helu praised Sun Tzu for his brilliance. He offered him even more influence, more control over the kingdom's military. But Sun Tzu had no intention of simply being a loyal servant. He had calculated every move, every decision, every moment of praise as part of his larger game. What most people didn't know was that Sun Tzu had been subtly planting seeds of doubt within the kingdom. He had been pitting generals against each other, feeding information to the right people, and even orchestrating minor conflicts within the court. All of it was part of his plan to increase his own power and ensure that he would never be sidelined. But even this wasn't the greatest of Sun Tzu's manipulations. The true twist what no one could have predicted was about to unfold, and it would change the fate of Wu in ways no one saw coming. The game Sun Tzu was playing was one of subtlety, timing, and most of all control. While King Helu and the court of Wu believed that Sun Tzu was their trusted general, Sun Tzu had begun to outgrow the role they had assigned him. He wasn't simply a commander in the field, he was quietly shaping the future of Wu itself. As his influence grew, Sun Tzu positioned himself as indispensable to the kingdom. His military genius was no longer in question, was seen as the very reason Wu had defeated Chu. But his ambition went beyond military conquest. By carefully weaving his influence into the fabric of Wu's court, he was positioning himself to one day rule, or at the very least, control the throne itself. This manipulation was as subtle as it was effective. Sun Tzu never overtly challenged the king. Instead, he subtly undermined King Helu's authority, ensuring that Helu's dependence on him continued to grow. He was patient, always playing the long game. Every moment of praise he received from the king, every recognition of his brilliance, was part of a much deeper strategy. Sun Tzu knew that to become the true power in Wu, he would have to control the king without ever appearing to do so. What no one saw coming was that Sun Tzu had carefully engineered a crisis zone that would pit the generals of Wu against each other. By spreading rumors, feeding misinformation, and exploiting old rivalries, Sun Tzu created a divide within the ranks. The generals, who once served together in harmony, began to distrust each other. Some even questioned the leadership of the king. The kingdom was starting to fray at the edges, and Sun Tzu was there, manipulating every aspect of it. With the kingdom on the brink of civil strife, Sun Tzu was positioned perfectly to seize control. The question now wasn't if he would rise to power, but when. But what was Sun Tzu's true goal in all of this? And would he stop at nothing to achieve it? Even today, the legacy of Sun Tzu continues to shape the world in ways many don't realize. His work, The Art of War, has transcended its origins as a military treatise. It is now a blueprint for success in everything, from business to politics, from leadership to psychology. But what most people don't know is that Sun Tzu's impact was not just in his strategy was in his ability to understand human nature, to manipulate the minds of those around him, and to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. In the years following his victory at Boju and the eventual political manipulation that reshaped the kingdom of Wu, Sun Tzu's influence only grew. He had not just defeated an army, he had changed the course of history by redefining how power was wielded. He wasn't a king, but he became the most powerful figure in the kingdom. His understanding of psychological warfare, his ability to read people and exploit their weaknesses, made him far more dangerous than any soldier or general. Sun Tzu's ultimate legacy wasn't just in the battles he won or the armies he commanded. It was in his ability to bend the minds of those around him, to make people see the world through his eyes. He understood that war was not just about weapons, it was about perception, control, and the manipulation of emotions. This was his true genius. But how did Sun Tzu's story truly end? While many remember him as a brilliant strategist, few understand the toll his constant manipulation and mental games took on him. There are no grand records of his death, no heroic final moments. His end came quietly, almost as if it had been part of his grand plan all along. What we do know is that Sun Tzu's death was not a tragic one, but rather a strategic one. His quiet exit from the stage of history left a legacy of questions. Was he ever truly loyal to the kingdom of Wu? Did his manipulations come with a personal price? These are the questions that linger even today. But there's one more twist to the story, a secret hidden in the depths of his teachings that could change everything we know about him. Sun Tzu left behind a legacy that was as complex as his tactics zone, that continues to intrigue historians, strategists, and even ordinary people seeking to understand how power works. The most enduring part of Sun Tzu's legacy is his work, The Art of War. This small, ancient text has had a profound influence across centuries. It is not just studied by military leaders, but has also found a place in the business world, where its principles are applied in negotiations, corporate strategies, and leadership. The lessons that Sun Tzu taught about deception, patience, and knowing the terrain have proven timeless. In the modern world, Sun Tzu's influence continues to resonate. From boardrooms in New York to political struggles in Washington, the principles he laid out over 2 millennia ago are still being used to outmaneuver rivals, seize opportunities, and control outcomes. His emphasis on adaptability, flexibility, and the value of misinformation are strategies that continue to be just as effective in today's world of economic and political battles. But even with this widespread use of his teachings, there remains an underlying question. Was Sun Tzu's genius truly as benevolent as it appears? The more you dig into his story, the more it seems that Sun Tzu was not just a tactician but a master manipulator, someone who used not only soldiers but entire kingdoms as pawns in his grand designs. Sun Tzu's life and the legacy he left behind force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power. Was he a hero, a visionary leader who helped his people achieve greatness? Or was he, at heart, a power-hungry strategist who cared for nothing more than his own rise to influence? The answers to these questions remain elusive, buried beneath layers of myth, legend, and interpretation. But one thing is certain. The world we live in today, whether in warfare, politics, or business, has been irrevocably shaped by the ideas Sun Tzu planted long ago. And as we move forward into an increasingly complex world, his strategies may still have more to reveal, pushing us to question what it truly means to win. Sun Tzu's story is one of brilliance, manipulation, and strategion that forever changed the way we view war, power, and leadership. His ability to weave deception and psychological tactics into every aspect of his life and career has left a mark on history that can't be ignored. But as we look back on his story, one thing becomes clear. His true genius was in his understanding of human nature. As you reflect on Sun Tzu's life, consider this. Was he truly the hero the world sees him as, or was he a brilliant manipulator, driven by an ambition that went beyond battlefield victories? What do you think of his methods and their impact on history? Was he a master of his time, or a man whose thirst for power came at a greater cost? We want to know your thoughts. Do you think Sun Tzu's legacy is one of inspiration or manipulation? Was he the ultimate strategist, or was there something darker behind his tactics? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's greatest minds, don't forget to like and subscribe. By doing so, you'll stay updated on more of our documentaries, where we uncover the hidden truths and untold stories of history's most fascinating figures. If you think Sun Tzu's manipulation was genius, wait until you hear about the next master tactician who took psychological warfare to a whole new level. His story will challenge everything you think you know about power and strategy. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in our series will leave you questioning everything.